severe weather watch has been issued by Environment Canada at 6:20 a.m. this morning. There is a possibility of severe thunderstorms with large hail and damaging winds.
We all know the importance of a weather report. Right or wrong, it helps us determine what clothes to wear, whether certain sports events will take place, whether we should plan on a picnic, go for a walk, or perhaps just stay home and watch television. But in the late 1700s, when the early settlers were arriving in Nova Scotia, of course, weather reports did not exist. And perhaps the need for information was even greater then than it is today. Should the ship set sail, or would it be becalmed? Should the farmer mow his hay, or will it rain? Well, the solution lay in a very simple invention, and made from a ready and abundant source of wood, the weather vane. At the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia, Richard Henning Field, curator for the Spirit of Nova Scotia exhibit, features whirligigs and weather vanes.
They are very decorative. In many cases, the weather vanes or whirligigs are in the form of people or of animals. What is important is that no matter how decorative they are, they still had a specific function. They were telling the direction of the wind and in some cases the velocity of the wind. A farmer would put a weather vane on his barn so that he could watch the changing winds, so that he could tell, perhaps if he is haying in his fields, that a change in the wind direction might bring a storm. Therefore, let's get the hay in now, or let's stop work now and do something else.
A good many of the pieces, of course, I know the history of. I've always been interested in tracing the history, retaining the history as much as possible. A good many of the items might be bought from the family that's owned them for generations. For instance, a weather vane that is in my collection happens to be in the Spirit of Nova Scotia show. We acquired from 3 elderly ladies whose father gave it to them when they were very small to play with. It's a very early weather vane off of one of the churches in Mahone Bay.
Kenneth Simone got into the act of creating whirligigs in his 70s, and literally by accident.
A whirligig can be any object that's propelled in any way by the wind. That's just about what it is, because the fans will always turn the wind if they're not swelled up or something. Mm-hmm. And old times, they just had the fan and then a body and a tailpiece. There was no moving parts to them. But the way I got into it, I was recouping from an accident, and to keep myself busy, I had a jackknife and a piece of wood, and it ended up with a pair of oxen. Well, then we got thinking about these things, why they wouldn't work, and experimenting with them. And of course that led us up to where it is now, with about 30 different models.
Even in the 18th and 19th centuries, whirligigs were created as much for fun and enjoyment as anything else. And when the carver had finished with the practical items around the house, he would turn his attention to toys.
There are several examples of toys in the folk sculpture section. Probably one of my favorites is a carving of a horse which I call Blackie. It's a Clydesdale, and the carving is approximately 10 inches high and about 10 inches long, and it shows a very powerful animal indeed. Clydesdales, of course, were the working animals of the farms, and they replaced the oxen of the late 18th and early 19th century. Rocking horses show, as far as I'm concerned, a very good marriage of function with decoration. The carving and the function, of course, of the animal itself was, as an early advertisement in the 1800s, early 1800s indicated, a chance to give wholesome entertainment and joy to children.
While the rocking horse was a toy, it also helped to familiarize the child with the shape of a horse and allay any fears when given their first pony ride. The ventriloquist's dummy, on the other hand, might scare a child initially, but Tweeter Johnson of Picton County was definitely in the business of entertaining children.
Tweeter is probably one of the best traditional folk carvers known in Nova Scotia. The examples of the dummy heads represent both black men and white men and were used in the minstrel shows in the United States. Traditionally, Tweeter carved and worked for the Barnum and Bailey circus people in the 1870s and 80s. Many of the dummy heads are carved from 2 pieces of wood which have been hollowed out. the operating mechanism for the dummy head was placed inside the hollowed out head and would be operated in the back of the dummy on a long pole that extended down, much like our spinal columns extends down, from the neck area of the head. Some of them had eyes that could move. Some of them, if you moved the lever in the back, the mouth would move.
If you couldn't afford to go to the circus for your entertainment, then you could certainly pull out a game board and have a game of parcheesi or checkers. And geometric motifs were often used by the early German settlers to decorate objects like game boards, as were chip carving decorations, while the Scottish showed a very definite preference for the thorny thistle. Whether it was weather vanes, whirligigs, rocking horses, ventriloquist dummies, or game boards, these objects show how the early settlers added beauty to the everyday objects to help establish themselves in the new life and transform their environment. I'm Ann Martin with another perspective on the cultural heritage of North America.